to what he has to say. All right then, the Zondo Commission's legal team has applied for the admission into evidence 3 hard drives that are the source of what has become known as the Gupta leaks, arguing they are relevant to the work of the Commission. The Gupta leaks contain thousands of emails between members of the Gupta family, their associates, including even some cabinet ministers, and they detail exactly how various business dealings were facilitated to become what is now known as state capture. Duduzane Zuma, the son of the former president Jacob Zuma, is alleged to be a key player in the facilitation of deals involving his father, senior politicians, and various entities controlled by the state. Well, we're joined now by Diso Black Star's Karyn Maughan to help us piece the puzzle together. This is the very reason, Karyn, good evening to you, that we have the inquiry. I mean, it all began with the Gupta leaks, did it not, in a sense? Well,
essentially, you know, obviously the genesis of it was the state capture report by Advocate Thuli Madonsela, but while her investigation, you know, the aftermath of it was being felt, we then saw last year this extraordinary kind of deluge of emails that were released to media organizations like Amabungane, Daily Maverick, etc., and really painted a picture of kind of an empire where there appeared to be strong evidence that the Gupta family had, in particularly in the matter of Transnet, for instance, utilized their connection to government to score substantial kickbacks. There were revelations about Eskom. There were revelations around Transnet. There was a whole mash of kind of evidence that came out. What is central, of course, is that in the wake of those emails, we saw people like Home Affairs Minister Malusi Kagaba, former Mineral Resources Minister, Mosebenzi Zwane, and of course Atul Gupta himself saying, well, we don't know even know if these are mere rumors. These emails could be fake. You know, we don't have evidence that they are real. And so there was this kind of pushback where there was no real substantive answer given to any of the issues that were raised in those emails. We now have a process where this inquiry is going ahead and saying we want this admitted into evidence. And with that admission into evidence, that material may potentially also become available to the Hawks, who up until now, Bongani, have been working off the media reports about the emails rather than having the emails themselves. So the moves that are playing out in the Zondo Commission at the moment have big repercussions.
Right, we'll come to that in just a moment. Of course, central to the acquisition of this information are 2 key individuals, so-called Stan and John. They will now, we understand, testify at a later stage, but who are they and where do they fit in?
We know very little information about them. Essentially, you know, what was fascinating about today's evidence, particularly from Brian Curran, a human rights lawyer, would be very well known in South African history as the person who helped to expose Vlakplaas through the evidence of Dirk Coetzee, comes forth and said he was approached by someone earlier earlier last year, where basically they said, look, I have this friend who has this potentially explosive information. He's very apprehensive. He doesn't know what to do. He then meets this person who we come to know as Stan, who's made it clear in other interviews, in one particular interview with Stefans Bremer, that neither he nor his fellow whistleblower, John, are in any way involved in the politics of the country. But when they came across this information, which they say they came across legally, we don't know how they got it, they felt an obligation that it must come out into the public domain because it exposed such profound nefariousness.
I thought it was interesting that part of the reason they did this was, we heard today at least, was the derisive laughter of the former president when all of these revelations came out. And interesting, when they looked around in terms of who to try and give this information to, they went to the media.
I think that was kind of a profound indictment. You know, we've had evidence against the Hawks already in this commission about Mcebisi Jonas, for instance, alleging that the Hawks attempted to squash his case in relation to these alleged corruption allegations against the Gupta brothers. You know, we've had Feki Mentor saying that, you know, she was asked to change aspects of her statement to not mention President Zuma. So, you know, one can understand in that context why they didn't take them to law law enforcement. And up until now, while the Hawks are very much trying to counter the suggestion that they are a captured organization, they're very much trying to put across this idea that they're part of this new dawn, this new renewal. Up until now, Bongani, they still do not have those emails.
So now this evidence has been around the block. I mean, it's gone to Nairobi, it was taken to Europe. The Americans have, what do they call it? Not copies, but clones of the hard drives. That's the legal term we were given today. Now, of course, it's been given to the Commission. One of the central pushback points, I would imagine, is the chain of evidence and whether that remains authentic and whether that remains uncontaminated.
Well, we know from Advocate Kate Hofmeyr, when she was addressing the inquiry on that specific point, she said, we have huge amount of documentation basically establishing every step of the journey that these drives have taken, where they were held, who they were held by. And it's very much the kind of preparation you make in advance of potential civil and criminal proceedings taking place off the back of these emails. And her and Advocate Paul Pretorius have made it very clear that these emails could form the basis of such a process, and that's part of the argument they're making for their admission into evidence. They're saying, this is a way of kind of, smoothing the ground in terms of those processes going forward. Of course, DCJ Zondo saying that while he may not have a problem with admitting the emails that have been analyzed so far, he's not entirely convinced that he should just put all of these emails into evidence.
Right, another big story, of course, that you've been tracking throughout the day is what the CONCOURT had to say about Minister BATHABILE DLAMINI. She was found to have given false evidence to the highest court in the land, not only in terms of her oral submissions, but even in sworn affidavits. But of course, it's up to the NPA now to decide whether or not there's a case to prosecute here.
This court ruling is extraordinary. It's the final and full ruling where a minister or a member of the executive has actually been held to account and will have to pay. We know similar rulings have been made against former President Jacob Zuma in the state capture matter. He's looking at a 10 million rand costs order in terms of his so-called reckless litigation in that matter. Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane also facing a 20% costs order, which he is appealing to the Constitutional Court in relation to her conduct in the South African Reserve Bank matter. All those appeals pending. But what has happened in the Constitutional Court is that they went through a thorough process, an inquiry of their own, aimed at determining, getting expert evidence about whether or not the alleged reckless conduct of BATHABILE DLAMINI would justify a personal cost order. They've made such a finding. But in addition to that, they found, as you've mentioned before, because of these dishonesties that were perpetuated under oath in papers and her evidence, they have asked the National Prosecuting Authority to consider possible criminal prosecution for perjury. So an extraordinary development and a truly extraordinary story.
Indeed, these are extraordinary times, both in terms of what we're hearing from the state capture inquiry. I thought it was quite an important point that the Deputy Chief Justice made in thanking particularly Karyn today, reflecting on his long involvement with human rights in South Africa. We'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Karyn Maughan, as always, a pleasure to have you with us in studio, giving the analysis that you do so ably. Back to Francis.